Hello and welcome to part 2 of a brief introduction to multiple intelligence. Today I'm going to talk about spiritual intelligence. In part 1 I spoke about physical intelligence and then cognitive intelligence, and then it was emotional intelligence, and now I'm talking about spiritual intelligence. And the other 3 types of intelligence are very important to spiritual intelligence. If you think about, the base is our physical intelligence, and if we don't take care of our physical body, our blood sugar, if we have too much caffeine or we put alcohol and drugs into our body, that definitely is going to affect our cognitive abilities and our emotional intelligence, our ability to have awareness of ourselves, awareness of other people and their emotional reaction, and also it will affect how maybe we read a room or read a situation. So that would be emotional intelligence. And today I'm going to talk about spiritual intelligence. And I want to first say thank you very much to Cindy Wigglesworth, who has developed the spiritual intelligence assessment and has put together incredible pictorial views of spiritual intelligence, and she has allowed me to use some of her PowerPoint slides in this. So thank you very much to Cindy Wigglesworth. Also, she has looked at all the intelligence, multiple intelligence, and sees that spiritual intelligence is really a capstone on top of all the intelligences, and definitely can be affected, just like I said, how physical intelligence can affect cognitive intelligence, how the way we take care of our physical body can affect our emotional intelligence, and it can also very much affect our spiritual intelligence and our ability to come from our best self, our highest self. So I want to first define what spiritual intelligence is. In looking at and defining spiritual intelligence, Cindy Wigglesworth looked at a knowledge base from philosophy, psychology, all the major faith traditions, science, and she brought that together and looking at the greatest spiritual teachers that have ever lived on the planet, and ones that you and I, if we sat down and wrote a list of all the greatest spiritual mentors, role models, that we would come up with a list of these people. And you might think about some of those people right now. Who stands out for you, both alive today on the planet and not living? Okay, so that's what she looked at when she defined spiritual intelligence and came up with the spiritual intelligence assessment. In terms of looking at the common traits of spiritual leaders, like loving, compassionate, wise, honest, courageous, faithful, peaceful and nonviolent, visionaries, outstanding leaders that had great emotional intelligence as well, leaders that were forgiving and accepting. Think about Nelson Mandela. Okay, you could probably think of a lot of really great spiritual role models. And when we define spiritual, we're not talking about religious. So let me talk about that for a moment. Spirituality is defined here as an innate human need to connect to something larger than ourselves, larger than our ego, something that we find sacred and divine. So that could be different for each person that's watching this video. It might be different for you than it is for me. So some people might call that something sacred and divine God, or Buddha, or the Buddha energy, might define it as Krishna. There's a lot of different ways that somebody might define that, and that would be what is higher, on something greater than them to connect with. It might be nature, it could be water, it could be the family consciousness. So there's a lot of ways that you can define this for yourself. So I'm not asking that you accept my view of what's a higher, divine, sacred intelligence or thing, that is up for you to decide what works for you. Religion is one way that we try to meet that innate need to connect to something higher and bigger than ourselves. And yet it's only one way. So you need to find what is your way and what fits for you. And as we're looking at spiritual intelligence, we're also looking at the faith traditions across the board have that golden rule. And that exists in most philosophies of life. Like, treat other people how you want to be treated. That's the basic golden rule that most of us grew up with, whether it was in a religious content or not. So Cindy Wigglesworth defines spiritual intelligence as the ability to behave with wisdom from the head and compassion, the heart, if you think about wisdom and compassion. So behaving with wisdom and compassion while maintaining inner and outer peace, equanimity, while maintaining inner and outer peace regardless of the situation. Yeah, I know that is a big one to swallow. Not only the definition, but it's a lot to live up to. So I want to break that down and help us define it a little bit more. And then also look at our higher self and a witness self. And I want to go into that more in detail so we can also look at how we're functioning from psychological level, since I am a psychologist, and look at how what we say to ourselves affects our emotions, our thoughts affect our emotions, and to take a look at that as well so we can further define spiritual intelligence and have some concrete ways to live up to that. So I want to talk about the ego for a second, because I'm also going to talk about the witness self and the higher self as we're talking about spiritual intelligence. And then we'll break down spiritual intelligence a bit further. So the first point I want to say is that the ego is not all bad. The ego is very important to our survival. If we didn't have an ego, we wouldn't know how to keep ourselves safe, and probably humans would not exist on this planet. The ego also taps into our reptilian brain, our oldest brain that we have, and it helps us to be safe. It helps us to pick up on danger, and it's defensive. And it has been defensive for a very good reason, because we need to survive. But we don't need to be so defensive, especially in our love relationships and people maybe at work, where we can notice that our ego gets triggered and our self-esteem gets triggered and we're not sure why. Let's take a look at that. I want you to think for a moment of some of the things that you say to yourself that you could consider to be harsh, okay? The critic is what I want to call that voice. I'm not the one that made that up, but we're going to talk about the critic. And when the critical self, or the critical parent, if you will, versus the nurturing parent inside ourselves, comes out and scolds us and gets mad at us or puts us down, calls us stupid, lazy, there's all kinds of words that you might have. And you might want to write a list of some of the things that you say to yourself that are harsh. And knowing how you react to that, the child part of yourself does react. That inner child part reacts in a way of defending or going into a place of feeling beaten up or hurt, and might rebel. So there's all kinds of ways that our child self could react to that. And usually we do something kind of against ourselves or something that's not so good for ourselves when we react to that critic. And so there goes the circle and the cycle, okay? So we get critical with ourselves, and maybe we put more stress and pressure on ourselves. I know that's one that I can definitely do myself, is put stress and pressure on myself to accomplish things and then feel bad about maybe not doing it in the way that I want it to be. Like, I want this video to be very good, very educational. And I've taped it a few times with different glitches and technical problems. And so it would be real easy for me to get down on myself. And what I say is, oh, I have to redo this, okay? So that would be a way of kind of overcoming some of that real negative self-talk that I can do. And I've definitely done a lot in my life. So if that's where you're at, that's perfect, that's fine. I definitely have a critic on my shoulder also. and it's just a matter of how you deal with it. So the first step would be to talk back to that critic. And the second thing that I want to talk about is the witness self. So I'm going very briefly into this. I'm doing a whole day workshop on this, and it's very easy to get in details about this. But just for now, in terms of spiritual intelligence, I want to make it simple. So what does your critical self say to your child self? What does your child self say back to your critic? Just looking at that. And as you're looking at that, you're in your witness self. As you can identify what is the critic and what is your child self, then you take yourself away and step back from the picture. And then you can witness it. Now, before we could witness it, we didn't know that we had a choice. But once you do have that choice, then you can make a difference. One of my most favorite books is called I Never Knew I Had a Choice by Jerry and Mariana Corey. And I've used that in teaching at the university at Cal State Fullerton in a personal group growth class. And that is the greatest title, because until you know that you have choices and you can see them in front of you, you don't really have a choice. It sure doesn't feel like you have a choice. But once you see that you have a choice and you can be the witness outside of yourself, then you have some choices. Then you can make choices from compassion and wisdom. And of course, as we go back into looking at spiritual intelligence, behaving with wisdom and compassion, that behavior is an important key to that definition. So I can have wisdom and compassion inside myself and still behave really poorly. I can act really defensively with my husband sometimes when he tells me something, and my ego comes in and I get defensive. And if I can stop myself before I open my mouth, and I can create a miracle. I think Wayne Dyer said, if you can just stop and say nothing sometimes, you've created a miracle. I love that line. And thank you to Wayne Dyer for that line, because if I can stop and witness what's going on and see maybe where I'm getting triggered, where my ego is getting triggered, or my child self is getting triggered, then I can make a different choice. And I can choose then to behave differently. And I might see that it's not about me at all, that maybe my husband is upset with me. Maybe it's about him, or he's frustrated, or, technology and the computer's down, or the internet, or whatever. Maybe that's more about what he's frustrated with. And then maybe I can come into that situation with wisdom and compassion to see the bigger picture. So that's just an example there. So the next thing I want to talk about, so we have our critic that can be on your shoulder, the witness that can step back and look at the situation, and then our higher self. And our higher self, if you think about it, is your capital S self, as my friend Debbie calls it, your best self, the self that you imagine on your best day that you can be. The part of you that lives from a place of your passion, that can be compassionate with other people, with the world, that is wise, that knows what your life mission is, that can see the bigger picture, and that is connected to something greater than yourself. It's higher than your ego. It's connected to something divine. Remember when I talked about spirituality? It's that connection to something greater than yourself. So you don't have to believe in a higher spirit or God or anything like that. You could say that your spirituality, that thing that is higher than you, would be helping animals and rescuing animals. Or it could be some great project that you have at work and you're part of that great project. It's also a way in business that leaders and CEOs bring people together for a higher purpose than just the individual person. And if you can lead from that place, which takes emotional intelligence and great spiritual intelligence, then you can lead people to be part of something greater, something higher than themselves, and not just about they want to get their needs met in that workplace. So that's just a little bit of what you can do even in the workplace with spiritual intelligence. And it's not about religion. It's not about getting someone to believe what you believe. It's about having each person believe in their own individual way and being connected to something greater than themselves. So let's talk about compassion for a moment, since I'm talking about wisdom and compassion, and those are big words, and what does it really mean? So we talked about behavior, and that's the willingness to stop, look at maybe the critic operating and the child reacting. It's about witnessing what's going on, and then coming with wisdom and compassion in your behavior. So compassion, we can look at not feeling what another feels necessarily. And as a therapist, empathy is what we teach people to feel and to have with other people. But usually when you have, well, sympathy is first really getting into the other person's pain. Empathy is similar, where you feel what the other person feels. Empathy is like two people then feeling so bad. Compassion is about really wanting to help that person get out of their pain. So that comes from a different place, that you don't necessarily need to feel their pain. And at the bottom level of all human beings, I believe that we're all very similar, that we all have hurt and pain and anger and feel love. So we have some real basic feelings that we all feel. Whether we're connected to them or not is another story. With compassion, you can know you can know really what it feels like to be angry, right? You can know what it feels like to hurt. You can know what grief feels like. And with compassion, you don't have to feel it. You don't have to go into it. But you can know through your own experience that it hurts to be grieving, that it hurts to feel pain, that it does not feel good to be angry. It's not a place that you want to stay. So you know those feelings because you've experienced them. And you might have some real wise ways to change that. And compassion is about just really wanting to help that person stop their suffering. Not necessarily that you have to do the work to take it away in a codependent way, like you're responsible for the other person's feelings, but you can maybe give them some tools or some guidance, or just be there while they're in their pain without having to go into it for yourself. Okay, so that's a big difference than taking it on for yourself. So with wisdom we're talking about coming from a place, a knowing, a deep, insightful place, maybe based on your own experience. And it selects the highest and the best course of action for all involved. So let me say that again. Selecting the best course of action for all involved. So not just looking at what can I do that seems really smart for me, but it's also about what can I do that would feel really good, that would be wise, that would come from some greater knowledge of how each person in this family could benefit, or each person in the company could benefit, or how the company, the planet, the stakeholders, the shareholders can benefit. So looking at the overview from the bigger picture, from the bigger place, again, to that higher self place, coming from the best self that you can be, and looking at how you can help in a situation with compassion, and then also the wisdom of holding a greater view for all involved. So behaving with wisdom and compassion, coming together, how do we do that? And what's the next step? Well, as I said in the definition by Cindy Wigglesworth, it's also about behaving with wisdom and compassion while maintaining inner and outer peace. Well, there's a lot of times that I came across like I had a lot of peace in critical situations, and I did a lot of trauma work, but inside sometimes I didn't have peace. And I didn't realize, and it was a big insight for me learning about spiritual intelligence, why I burned out and why I got so exhausted doing the work that I was doing. Because I came across as peaceful and a very tumultuous and dealing with a lot of tragedies, a lot of traumas, but inside I paid the price. And I'm an introvert by nature, so not really understanding that all that went together. When I started learning about spiritual intelligence, it was like, oh my gosh, I get it. That's why I burned out. I didn't have the inner peace. And as much as I tried to find it, I really couldn't. It wasn't until I really got serious in my meditation practice that I did that. And that's why I decided that that was so important to write a book on meditation. And then I decided, well, just a book on meditation isn't enough. I need to teach people how to do that. And thus came Meditation Now, and with a whole online environment where it gives you audio videos, and I really teach you more how to go into meditation and get past that chattery brain that we have, right? Cindy fashioned after Goldman and Boyatzis from emotional intelligence the competency model. That looks at self-awareness, social awareness, self-management, and relationship management. So then what happened is Cindy said, well, that's a good model to use to look at that and put that 4-quadrant model to spiritual intelligence. So there she came with self-awareness, so the smaller self, as I talked about, the ego, and then higher self-awareness. And I've added in that witness place out of some work that Debbie Dalla Cuesta and I are doing in working with the shadow side of ourselves, called Alchemy of the Shadow. And that is going from the critic and the ego state, helping the critic to grow up, and watching from that witness place and coming into your higher self. Okay, so how all that goes together. So the first quadrant and the first skill of competency for spiritual intelligence would be really your awareness of yourself, of a greater worldview, and then your awareness of your higher self. So are you aware of your higher self? Did you know you have one? Hey, if you didn't, here you go. You've got a higher self. Now the whole thing is really trying to find that and communicate with that part of yourself. It's really a wonderful thing to be doing. The second quadrant is universal awareness. So self-awareness, universal awareness. And that would be awareness of other people's perspectives, other people's spiritual beliefs, religious beliefs, understanding that you can have an idea and somebody else can have an idea, and you can both have pieces of the truth, and yet it's not the whole truth, but it's the truth for that person at that time. And that there's larger views and larger, like before anyone knew that the earth was round, they all thought it was flat, then they figured out it was round. Then we went to space, we found out there's a lot more galaxies out there. You know, it just, our perspective of time and space keeps growing. The third quadrant for competencies for spiritual intelligence is self-mastery. So again, the ego mastery and the higher self mastery. So looking at both of those levels. And the fourth quadrant is social mastery and spiritual presence. So finding that you're a calm presence. Remember when I said I thought that I was coming across calm and didn't understand why I burned out? Well, I didn't have that internal calm presence for myself, inside myself. I could have it for everyone else, and I knew how to operate that way, but I didn't really know how to create that and live from that space inside myself. So that would be more along the lines of social mastery. Can you keep your heart open, even when things are coming at you that hurt? And how do you do that? How do you keep your heart open? Are you able to act from compassion? Are you able to react in a way that you come from wisdom? And can you behave with wisdom and compassion? So like I said, there's a lot to master here. And I expect to be doing this the rest of my life. And I don't expect to ever totally master all of this. And I don't expect you to either. If you're interested in doing a spiritual intelligence assessment and going further with this, I do coaching, and if I get busy, I have a lot of other people that we can refer you to. We have people through Deep Change all over the United States, all over the world, and you can find a coach that's in your area as well. And you can do that through deepchange.com. My website is raisingconsciousnessnow.com. So you'll probably be seeing that at the bottom of this video anyway, and I invite you to check it out, to check out my Meditation Now book if you haven't done so, or if you're not watching this video as a result of actually purchasing that book or being part of that training program. So in closing on spiritual intelligence, what I want to leave you with is the definition again. Spiritual intelligence is behaving with wisdom and compassion while maintaining inner and outer peace regardless of the situation. So that means no matter how stressful it is, that you can behave with wisdom and compassion. And with that, I'm hoping that you don't beat yourself up with that definition and say, wow, I'm not there, I'm not doing it. Remember, this is based on the greatest spiritual leaders and the greatest role models that we've ever had, ever on the planet. And it is something to work towards. It's not something to beat yourself up with. I would encourage you, if you want to go further also, to look at your own worldview and put yourself in situations where you can see other people's worldview that is different from yours. Different cultures, different genders. Try to experience the world through other people and see what that feels like. And see that they have a piece of the truth maybe that you don't have, and that you might have a piece of the truth that they don't have, and that there's even a bigger truth about everything. And take a look at that and just look at your own biases. We all have them. Look at what works for you and what doesn't work for you, and look at what works for other people and what doesn't work for them. And as you do that, come from that witness place without judgment. When we can step away from our judgment, because judgment is very much about ego and making ourselves better than the other person, and we can step away from that judgmentalness, then we can start to come from our best self, our highest self. So I really encourage you to do that for yourself, to allow yourself just the wonderful process of being human, and to allow yourself to be all that you can be. And possibly out of that place, you might find that you have a new passion and a new passion for doing something on this planet. And you might come out with a new mission for yourself on this planet. Whatever that might be. It can be big, it can be small, but listening to that still small voice inside of yourself. And listening and trying to connect to the best self that you are. So may peace be with you always. Thank you very much.